And what about, like, as you got older? Was there a time in your life where you were older where you're like, okay, now I'm definitely in this, I know? Like, when were you, like... How did you come to terms with? Was there a time where you, like, had some dramatic thing where you're like, I have to face this, I have to come to terms with this, and this is what it is? Or was it a long, slow process?
I think both. I think it's a really long... I think what it really is and continues to be a series of things like you're talking about. A series of, like, maybe sometimes big, dramatic, maybe sometimes small, dramatic, maybe just... The real thing is day by day, you know, you change incrementally and almost imperceptibly. But, yeah, I mean, there were a couple kind of, I would say, watershed moments in dealing with my sexuality. But more than anything, it's the fact, you know, I think gay people, and I think a lot of people do have this experience, but they talk about their coming out experience as if it's like
the moment.
It's the moment, and for me, and I think kind of universally, I think people change really slowly, and you can't process everything all at once. And but I mean, when I was the summer I turned 16, or maybe it was the summer I turned 16. I remember it was the first time I spoke with really anybody about it, and I talked to a close friend about it, who I think had struggled with some of the same feelings, and we kind of confided in each other a little bit about it. And then I think within a couple of days I actually talked to my father about it. My dad and I were having, like, in the way that I think teenage sons, I'm the oldest boy, I'm the second oldest of 8. I have an older sister who I think, you know, took a lot of the brunt of young parents figuring out how to raise children.
Right.
But I think as the oldest son, or just sons and fathers always have tension, I think, or maybe they don't. I'm speaking in real universals. I don't pretend to know everything about humanity. My father and I had a little tension at this age, more like power struggle stuff. And I think the big thing was my curfew when I was coming home. And I came home late one night, we had this big, you know, he was waiting for me, and we had this big go around. And I felt compelled to tell him about it. And I should say I was always praying about it. I was reading my Book of Mormon. I was, you know, I had, like, set up, like, charts for myself to see how long I could go without masturbating. And I remember really early on hearing President Benson or somebody say that if we read the Book of Mormon every day, like, you know, we'd find that the problems in our lives would kind of dissipate and take care of themselves. So I was reading the Book of Mormon every day. I was really active, and I was really developing, like, a real strong, I guess I could use the word testimony, but I was developing a real strong love, not just for the Book of Mormon, but for my Savior, because I felt like a real genuine, like, presence in my life as I was struggling and feeling, you know, you're so young anyway, and you're in your adolescence, it's all about just ups and downs, but I felt like a real stability and a real sense that the Savior was there for me, you know what I mean? And from what, you know, from the examples that my parents, you know, had set in the way that people treat each other, and from, you know, different leaders. And I mean, there was a whole, like, belief system that was really clustered around a real genuine experience, and that was, like, an experience of the love that I really felt that was a transcendent love. It was the love of God, and that I really felt in my life. And I think that was when, I think that just kind of guided me to be able to talk to my dad about it, you know. And I think that my father, despite the fact we were having problems, had always been a very, like, involved father, a very attentive father, and you know, he did lose his temper at times, but he was a very loving father too, and continues to be. And so I was struggling with this. We were having this tension, and I somehow thought it was relevant. So I told him about it that night, and that kind of started me talking to him about it. And, you know, he talked to him, and we talked to my mom about it. And then I started going to therapy, and, you know, I was like, I can handle this myself. Me and the Savior, we can do this, you know. And my dad's like, well, you know, would it help you to talk to somebody? We'd really like you to talk to somebody. And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, we'll talk more about it, blah, blah, blah. And then I started going to see somebody at social services, LDS social services, and, you know, and it was, and, like, starting with that, there was a whole series of, like, confronting it as a reality in my life and dealing with it in the open. And I've always been a pretty open person, so I talked to a lot of people about it, you know, slowly. But that was the beginning of it. And, of course, there was a whole different perspective on it at that point.
How do you feel the church, Mormonism or the church, affected? I mean, took control of? What's your relationship to the church now? What was the whole, like, you went to the service?
I went to all the social services, and you know.
Do you think they helped you? Didn't help?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they helped in many ways, and you know, there are things about it that I think were detrimental. Like actually, have kind of made things more difficult, and there are things about it which have made all the difference. And and it's really hard to quantify that, and it's hard to tease the two things apart. And that's the whole thing with the church, my relationship with the church and the gospel, is that there's so many things about it that are so wonderful, and like really, like if I were to like divorce myself from it and say I'm not Mormon, say for me personally, if I were to say the church bad, horrible, blah blah blah, I would literally be killing a part of myself. Like I would literally be denying a ginormous component of my identity. And there are other parts, and so I think for me I have to be very very careful, not for anybody else, not because I care what someone who is Mormon, who's not Mormon thinks, although I do, but that's not what I'm talking about. Careful for myself because I'm trying to be honest with myself. Do you know what I mean? I have to be really honest and fair to myself and my experiences, you know? And about the way I like look at my relationship, specifically to the church as an organization, but also to the gospel as a whole and everything that entails, and, you know, moving to Utah, the culture that I was then at that point raised in. And so social services, as part of, you know, kind of in many ways, you know, reflects the church as an organization, the gospel, the culture. There were things about it that were really detrimental, things about it that were really helpful. I think the thing that was most helpful is that these are like actually licensed clinicians. They're not just, they have PhDs and, you know, LCSWs. I mean, they're actually people who have been by the state of Utah, but I mean licensed, and they are educated, and I think they approached it by and large pretty professionally. They are only human, and so it always comes through the bias and filter of who they are. And I think I had my great therapist was this guy named Wes, and his first thing was to help me feel good about myself and help me understand who I am. And it wasn't necessarily just about my sexuality, and I think that was the biggest thing. I think he had a bigger purpose in doing that, but I think that was so important because, I mean, it really early on helped me understand who I am just generally in so many ways, like the complexities and the diversity of who I am as a human being, and that this was just part of who I am, and that remains true. You know, your sexuality is not everything. And he had his ideas and his opinions that he presented as his ideas and opinions, and, you know, and he said, you know, you're here because you want to overcome it, and that's what we help people do at social services, or we help them find a way to manage it. But it wasn't.
Do you think it's possible to overcome?
I mean, for me, I don't think it's the phrase overcome has kind of lost its potency for me at this point. But at that age, it felt very real and very possible. I think I really quickly realized, you know, and this is all before my mission. By the time I was on my mission, I think I got very comfortable with the idea that this may very well be something that I'm going to deal with for all my life. And I think that my first therapist told me that, was like, you know, very few people are really able to, like, eradicate these feelings. Most people are going to be dealing with them for the rest of their lives, and it's about learning how to manage them and learning maybe for you what causes them, what triggers them, what makes them, you know. So when you talk,
would you want to change now?
No. I mean, change.
Would you like to be straight?
No. And no. I mean, it's a very good question, but to think, I don't know what. Who would I be?